Welcome to today's webinar, The Role of Community and Faith-Based Organizations in Leading Change, hosted by the Maryland Department of Planning in association with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Brownfields and Land Revitalization Program and Office of Community Revitalization and the Smart Growth Network. My name is Michael Bayer. I'm the Manager of Infrastructure and Development at the Maryland Department of Planning and Project Manager for the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse. The Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse is a project of the Smart Growth Network supported by the U.S. EPA's Office of Community Revitalization and managed by the Maryland Department of Planning. In addition to hosting webinars, the Smart Growth Information Clearinghouse has a website at smartgrowth.org that provides information on effective growth, development, and preservation practices. The website provides information about events, funding opportunities, awards, and resources to help local decision makers foster healthy, resilient, and economically vibrant communities. The Clearinghouse is the virtual home of the Smart Growth Network, a nationally recognized coalition of leadership organizations that have formally endorsed the principles of smart growth. This webinar is one in a series of webinars produced by the Maryland Department of Planning on smart growth and planning topics available for viewing at smartgrowth.org. This webinar is also the second in a series sponsored by the U.S. EPA's Brownfields and Land Revitalization Program and Office of Community Revitalization called Learning from and Leaning on Local Leaders to Revitalize African American Neighborhoods. Thank you for participating today, and we encourage you to attend the other webinars in this series. The views expressed by the speakers in this webinar are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the Maryland Department of Planning or the state of Maryland. We are recording this webinar and will be posting it on our website under the Webinar Archives tab. We encourage you to visit the website and to subscribe to our e-newsletter to learn about our upcoming webinars. You can also find out about planning initiatives, planning tools, and educational opportunities in Maryland by visiting the Maryland Department of Planning's website at planning.maryland.gov. Viewers of this live event are eligible to receive 1.5 CM credits from the American Planning Association and 1.5 CNUA CEU self-reported credits from the Congress for the New Urbanism. To log your AICP credits, visit the American Planning Association's website at planning.org, log into your account, and search for the name of today's event, which is the role of community and faith-based organizations in leading change. You can also search for event number 9221277. Today's session will be introduced by Jim Vanderkloot, who is the Land Revitalization Coordinator for US EPA Region 5, followed by remarks from Eugene Jones, Jr., CEO of the Housing Authority of the City of Atlanta and former Director of the Chicago Housing Authority. Our presenters today are Dr. Byron T. Brazier, Bill Jones, Felicia Dawson, and Bill Eager. Eugene E. Jones, Jr. is a public housing policy expert with more than 35 years of executive leadership experience in advocating for affordable housing in major cities across the United States and Canada, in management, public-private partnerships, operations, finance, and governance in the public housing industry. He served for 4.5 years as CEO of the Chicago Housing Authority, and he's also the author of the book Housing Humans. Dr. Byron T. Brazier is a pastor of the Apostolic Church of God in the Woodlawn neighborhood of Chicago. As an advocate for community development, Dr. Brazier continues to ensure that the church remains a beacon of light and an agent of change in the community. He is the chairman of the Network of Woodlawn, the Bishop Arthur M. Brazier Foundation, and BSD Industries L3C. Bill Jones is the founder and president of Bill Jones & Associates, providing development and consulting services to small businesses, nonprofit, and religious organizations. Prior to establishing his firm in 2001, Bill served as an senior executive community-based organizations in Boston, Kansas City, Missouri, and Chicago. In the mid-1990s, Bill served as the executive director of the Woodlawn Preservation and Investment Corporation, where he oversaw the development of several multifamily and single-family developments in Woodlawn. Next, Felicia Dawson is Vice President of Strategic Partnerships for the Preservation of Affordable Housing, or POA, communities, where she works as a liaison between the development team and property management around issues of community and resident engagement. Felicia joined POA in 2011 to develop government and community engagement strategies to successfully revitalize Woodlawn Park, a choice neighborhood site in Chicago. And finally, Bill Eager is POA's Senior Vice President of Real Estate Development. He oversees all multifamily development activity for POA's Chicago region, and he has more than 20 years of experience in economic development, affordable housing development, and municipal finance. Following their presentations, our panelists will answer as many questions as time permits. As usual, you can submit a question anytime by using the questions tool in the control panel located on the right side of your screen. And as we usually do, we're going to start with a quick poll that's going to ask you where you are visiting from today. We'll be launching that momentarily. If you're having any trouble with responding to it, you may need to exit from full screen mode. We'll give you a few seconds to respond before we turn it over to Jim. And after him, Eugene. We were having some technical difficulties with Eugene's camera, so I'm not sure we'll be able to see him during his remarks. And he does not have any slides, so please bear with us when we get to that part. Just give you a couple more seconds to respond, and we'll launch that. And then I'm going to turn it over to Jim. And thanks again for everybody for being here and for responding to this. We're excited to share the next segment of this webinar series. And we'll be closing it here, and actually pretty close representation, 29% Mid-Atlantic Northeast, 28% audience today is in the South, 26% in the Midwest, 14% in the West, and we do have 3% international today. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Jim Vanderkloot.
Hello, my name is Jim Vanderkloot. I'm with the US EPA Chicago office in the Brownfields program, and I'll be your facilitator today. This is the second of a 6-part series focused on long-term community strategies in African American neighborhoods, with lessons learned from those who led the projects. After reading recent publications such as The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein and Andre Parry's Know Your Price, many of us at EPA have been thinking about how we can improve our approaches to community work. If you haven't read these books, they come highly recommended and help provide a fuller understanding of the damage done by historic federal, state, and local laws and policies to African American communities. In this series, you'll be learning from a series of case studies in African American communities where great progress has been made towards improving quality of life for the people who live there. You'll hear about the roles of leadership, nonprofit, government, churches, and other local players. And we'll hear about emerging tools that can help communities now while respecting the lessons of the past. We will also get the perspective of our speakers on what success looks like. These case studies are intended to start a dialogue and to help us all learn from each other. Many thanks to our hosts today, the Maryland Department of Planning, the Smart Growth Network, and EPA's Offices of Community Revitalization and Brownfields and Land Revitalization. A special thanks to Sarah Gruza and Linda Morgan of US EPA Region 5 and Kathy Brown of K. Brown and Associates in helping to build today's webinar. Today's webinar is the one of our series with the broadest sweep. It covers community efforts over the last 60 years in the Woodlawn neighborhood of Chicago, starting in the 1960s. There are no specific EPA activities associated with today's presentations. Rather, we focus on the role of an influential church, related community development success stories, and on recent, meaning last 12 years, nonprofit efforts. Before getting into the panel, we will start with an insightful intro from Eugene Jones, President and CEO of the Atlanta Housing Authority. With that, I'll hand it over to Eugene.
Hey, Jim. So Eugene had some more technical difficulties and is not with us at the moment. So I think we'll just go forward right through the presentations, and perhaps we can have Eugene speak at the end.
Excellent.
Okay. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Brazier.
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you so much, Jim. It's certainly a pleasure to be with you and all those who are visiting this webinar. And it is a pleasure to tell the Woodlawn story and the institutional story of the church, the Apostolic Church of God in the Woodlawn community, as well as the growth. We're here to tell the story. We're here to define what has worked over time and what has improved the quality of life of our community. I am trying to, there we go. And so for those who, you say, where is Woodlawn? Well, this is a outline of the city of Chicago with Lake Michigan being here, and Woodlawn is now in green. And right here in the upper right-hand corner of Woodlawn will be the Obama Presidential Library. That'll be somewhere right in here. Right a little bit over here on the top is the Museum of Science and Industry. And just north of this line, in fact, in some parts of Woodlawn, is the University of Chicago. And these are the major stakeholders along with the YMCA of Chicago. Let me tell you just a little bit about faith-based history. Woodlawn in the 1960s was a community that had a population of about 96,000 people. And there were a lot of tenements, there were a lot of rooms that were apartments that were split up into rooms. The community is now about 25,000, and there was earlier last year there were any number of vacant lots that are now being bought up by private developers. But one of the most interesting things about Woodlawn is that it is an education community. There is naturally the University of Chicago, but there is also 4 high schools within 6 blocks of one another. And it really makes Woodlawn educationally prepared and ready. With that, in relationship to the Apostolic Church of God, which was founded in 1932, it had 3 different locations, one in the Washington Park area. But then in Woodlawn, they moved to Woodlawn in 1953. And in 1960, 2 churches merged. And my father, Bishop Arthur M. Brazier, became the pastor in 1960. And from 1960, where we started with 100 members, we exponentially grew over the next 3 generations. But in the 1960s, my father was the president and founder of what is known as the Woodlawn Organization. And originally it was called TWO, and it was called the Temporary Woodlawn Organization because it did not have a 501c3 status, and then it was changed to the Woodlawn Organization. But he was also president and chairman of the Woodlawn Preservation and Investment Corporation, or what is known as WPIC. And you'll hear Bill Jones speak about WPIC. And then after that, the network of Woodlawn was developed. That was a part of WCPC. I'm sorry, NCP Woodlawn, which is the Neighborhood Communities Program, which was funded by LISC. My father was the chairman of that. And then from that came the Woodlawn Children's Promise Community, which was a educational model that was modeled after the Harlem Children's Promise Zone. I do want to introduce to you another name, Dr. Leon Finney, who was the president of TWO after my father and was a longtime advocate, both businessman, community leader, and developer in Woodlawn. And he was president of TWO, but also the Woodlawn WCDC, the Woodlawn Community Development Corporation. I also want to introduce you to a woman by the name of Maddie Butler. And for those who remember Jerry Butler, the singer, this is his sister, and she was the founder of We Can. And then finally, I came on board in 2010 after the passing of my father, and we expanded on the WCPC model to create what is known as the Network of Woodlawn and its 4 pillars. So to give you a kind of perspective of the Apostolic Church of God, this is the Apostolic Church of God as it is today, and it sits on about 17 acres in the Woodlawn community. But I do want to note that right here where my where my pointer is, where it says South Kimbark Avenue, right here in that one little area, that was the church that we bought in 1960. And we exponentially grew to this particular campus where we are today. And as the community has grown, the church has grown. As the church has grown, the community has grown. And the Apostolic Church of God remains the largest institutional advocate for the community of Woodlawn. I talked about these were the organizations that were developed, but I do want to concentrate a little bit on what is taking place now, which is the network of Woodlawn and One Woodlawn. And these organizations are all linked one with another and have a common thread of leadership throughout the Woodlawn community. And the network of Woodlawn came about in 2012. And what we determined was that there were 4 major pillars for every community. And those are education, public safety, economic development, and health and human services. We understand the integration between these when we say that if in fact a community has high education and high economic development, it will tend to have low public safety needs and low human service needs. When a community has low education and low economic development, it will have high public safety needs and high human service needs. So in order for a community to begin to transform itself, it must address education and economic development along with public safety and human services. But the education and economic development are critical to addressing the public safety issues. With that, what we also then created was something called One Woodlawn, because there are actually 4 quadrants. There are 4 different communities that are part of this 2 square mile community of Woodlawn. And there's a street called Cottage Grove, and then there's 63rd Street, which are the dividing lines. And it pretty much evenly divides Woodlawn population-wise. The University of Chicago tends to be in the northeast section, which will always tend to be in high economic development. But our southwest Woodlawn tends to be where most of our violent crime takes place. And so we had to create a mantra called One Woodlawn that included our institutional stakeholders here, our Jackson Park stakeholders, and Jackson Park is where the Obama Library is going to be. It's a 300-acre park that has a 27-hole golf course, 12, 18 tennis courts. It has any number of ball fields. It's a very large park. Then we have the boards of the network of Woodlawn, which include all of those that were a part of the education and safety, because each one of those pillars are their own 501c3s. And then we have the Woodlawn parents, and then we have quadrant leaders and their teams. And when we developed this, we found that we have now, with the One Woodlawn, more than 150 people participating in the growth of Woodlawn every month. We held One Woodlawn meetings. We held them at the church where we had no less than 400 people every 90 days for 3 years up until the time of the pandemic. And so what we brought about from an economic development standpoint is that we created a master plan through Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill, and we trained the residents in urban development. We began to communicate with urban developers as well as housing developers. And we institutionally engaged residents, the Obama Library, the University of Chicago, the aldermen, the Department of Planning, the mayor's office, developers, as well as other planners. The whole idea is for Woodlawn to be a self-determined community with answering the question, what do you want to build? You have to have a vision, a systemic vision that is community developed, not developer developed. one that still requires developers, but one that institutionalizes a community where it develops its plan, it leverages its stakeholders. There is a unity of purpose that's not stuck in a program, but a unity of purpose that supersedes individual interest. And then we had a tremendous communications effort from a standpoint of developing the community will. What is the will of the community? Initiated through the One Woodlawn designation and the 4-quadrant strategy. The whole idea of making a community an institution becomes very critical in the thought process. So we're not just individuals talking and having special interest. There was a convening that was taking place, even going back to the 1960s from a historical perspective, that really looked at how education, safety, and economic development work together. The structure was structured around stakeholders, the One Woodlawn designation, and the quadrants. We did a tremendous amount of planning, starting with the quality of life plan that was initiated through the NCP, the Neighborhood Communities Program that came out of LISC. We then took that and asked Gensler, which is an architectural planning company, to add to and put a little girth to it. From there, Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill came in and really laid out a community level plan that we then verified with a company called AECOM and Economic Development Study. Now, critical to all these plannings is that from Gensler to Skidmore to AECOM, where the Quality of Life program was funded by LISC and MacArthur, the Gensler, Skidmore, and AECOM were actually funded by Citibank. And I do want to openly thank them for their major contributions to the development of this plan, which is why we have resource development. And we also were a part of the choice grant, which you will hear from Bill Eager. The outcomes was the whole outcome was to shift from a place-based development strategy to a community-based development strategy, where we look at the entire 2 square miles and not just, we had to start somewhere, but each quadrant had its own plan and its own plan for what it needed to do, since they were actually different. We positioned it to take advantage of an accelerated economic growth that was taking place, that was happening in Woodlawn, really institutionalizing it, aligning all of our resources, bringing together a well-developed community that was not divided, and we attempted to reduce all the competition that was there. And what took place out of that was that, from an educational standpoint, we in, I think it was 2016 to 2019, there were no underperforming schools in Woodlawn. We had a very progressive success from 2013, from 2012 to 2013 to 2016, from a public safety standpoint. And we had a comprehensive economic development plan and that plan was accepted by the City of Chicago Department of Planning. It was taken to the Plan Commission of the City of Chicago and was accepted and received. A part of this idea of institutionalization was, how does a community really look to all the other institutions? So in Woodlawn, you have the University of Chicago, the Obama Library, and the City of Chicago, naturally. But then where does the community fit? And so the community, we institutionalized that through the network of Woodlawn, developing a master planning strategy that was integrated, that dealt with the economics, tourism, architectural, as well as environmental. And the whole idea was to create the building blocks of community will, which is absolutely necessary. The community will is not governmental will or not governmentally sponsored. It is the will that we have to actually be organized and self-determined, to align assets, plans, foundations, to have a voice with our own financial capacity and support systems. We certainly had to do, in these final steps, which is my final slide, we certainly had to look at non-displacement strategies for what was currently there. Now, we recognize that Woodlawn was 96,000, now 25,000 people had already been displaced. But how that does not further exacerbate itself was something we had to consider. We had to look at the aggregation of land and vacant buildings, and then take a look at how developers were aggregated, and then the support system for development. These are the things that we had done in Woodlawn to institutionalize ourselves, and I'm thankful for the support that we have received from our stakeholders, from our funders, from the planning, and from our relationships that we have with POA, relationships that we have with the City of Chicago, the Obama Library, University of Chicago, and the Museum of Science and Industry. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Looking forward to your questions. And now I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Bill Jones, who worked very closely with my father during these middle years and has a tremendous amount of experience in Woodlawn. So thank you very much. It's been my pleasure. Jim, may God bless you.
Thank you, Dr. Brazier. It is it's going to be a bit of a challenge to follow you. It seems like what we did back in the 90s was just peddling, but it was really a precursor to what you've just presented to this audience. And it is a show that from the 1960s through today, it has been a continuing progress towards community control over development in Woodlawn. And as we all know, that is an important aspect of what we need to do in all communities throughout this country, is to make sure that people have the ability to self-determination. So with that, let me start my slides. I had, it's interesting, you know, we did pretty much the same thing. I think we've got one name that I've added that you didn't have on yours. And to go back over, Dr. Arthur Brazier was chairman. He was pastor of Apostolic Church, and he was a leader who was respected by all people. I once had a person say to me, I don't know if I ever mentioned this to you, Dr. Brazier, but a person said to me, I don't necessarily agree with him, but I respect him, and he's an honest man who always does the best for the people in the community that he serves. And that was an interesting thing, particularly if you knew who the person was. Let me not dwell on that. Dr. Finney was another, you know, just a person who was bound and determined. He was Woodlawn. He'd grown up there. Mattie Butler also grew up in Woodlawn. And Allison Davis, who was a lawyer and a private developer, he didn't grow up in Woodlawn, but he did grow up in Woodlawn, but he was a lawyer that served this community well and helped us through a lot of the legal things that we had to get through with city and other aspects of that. So having people who had grown up in the community that knew the ins and outs of development and the city process was an important aspect of this. We had community goals back in the 90s. We wanted to create a mixed income neighborhood. We kind of knew what we had, but we also knew that everybody else didn't necessarily know that. So we wanted to create a mixed income neighborhood. We wanted to get commercial businesses, grocery stores, restaurants, etc. We wanted to create more home ownership. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. And we especially wanted to make sure that people who lived in the community and looked like the people who lived in the community had an opportunity to participate economically in the revitalization of our community. And so those were the goals that we had back in those days, back in the 90s. I sort of put this on as, you know, what a SWAT would look like then. this is not today's SWAT, but this is those days. The strength of Woodlawn, as Dr. Brazier indicated, had lots and lots and lots of vacant land. It was suitable for development. You could get lots relatively cheaply in Woodlawn back in the 90s. We also had strong community institutions, the churches, experienced community development organizations, the Y, other organizations in the community that were involved in seeing development go on. We had proximity to major institutions, as Dr. Brazier pointed out. You had the Museum of Science and Industry, University of Chicago. I don't want to miss the 57th and 63rd Street beaches. I live not in Woodlawn, but just outside of Woodlawn, and my daughter grew up in the summertime on those beaches, being able to just walk to the beach. The quality of existing structures, one of the things that gets missed sometimes is that while Woodlawn has lost a lot of population, the buildings in many cases remain. The graystones, the brownstones that abound in that community was important, but also the construction, as you just saw in the picture, the construction of the new Apostolic Church of God sanctuary. It sort of, as an institution, said to the community, we're planting a flag here. The church is planting a flag here. We're going to be here. We've made this investment, and the community, we're going to help the community build around us. And I've heard people say that if every church built what they could see when they walked out their door, there would be no underserved communities. Some of the things that we struggled with is the market in the 90s did not support, the Woodlawn market did not support the construction of new homes. Single family house in Woodlawn in decent condition, you might have gotten $50,000 for. There was no way that in the 90s you could build a house for $50,000. Community was not considered safe, so people weren't looking to Woodlawn to move, despite the fact that it had all these amenities around it. Land assemblage was a challenge. The fact of the matter is, we struggled with the fact that these were individual lots owned by individuals. They may have been foreclosed. They may have been people who just moved away and didn't bother, so they weren't owned by anybody, or the person that owned them was gone. We were concerned that outside private developers, if they were to build in the community, would price current residents out of the neighborhood. Existing homeowners were resistant to new construction, specifically market rate, because they were worried that if the values in the neighborhood were to increase, their taxes would increase and they'd be taxed out of the community. And finally, there was a fear of encroachment by the university. They had been a big battle in the 60s with the University of Chicago as they tried to encroach on Woodlawn, and people like Dr. Brazier and Bishop Brazier and Dr. Finney and others fought that battle and won, and people that remember that didn't want to see that battle reemerge with the university maybe being successful this time. City, like many cities, had programs for first-time home buyers. They had capable nonprofit developers. They had the city was interested in the community and willing to put assistance for people to buy. The University of Chicago was a big boost for us because the University of Chicago provided up to $30,000 for their employees if they purchased a house within 3 miles of the university. Well, most of that was Woodlawn. And again, you're 20 minutes from downtown by public transportation. One of the things that didn't make it to this slide, one of the things that didn't make it to this slide is the fact that the university, one of the things that didn't make it to the slide is that the university expanded their police force, and this was a very important aspect in the redevelopment. But the university police force stopped at 61st Street. Through collaboration with the community, the university expanded their police force that it began to serve to 66th Street, which provided a double layer of police coverage. You had the Chicago Police and the University of Chicago Police. And without trying to cast any aspersions on the City of Chicago's police department, the university police usually got there first. So that was a big boon for the community in that they were able to get the additional public safety assistance from the university. So that happened. I mentioned the homeowners' resistance on taxes to new construction. And it was a big thing. We go to community meetings and you would actually have people who wanted to see community improvement say you can't build a house because if you build a house for $200,000, they're going to appraise my house for $200,000. And right now my house is appraised at $50,000, and I'm paying taxes on $50,000. And if I have to pay taxes on $200,000, I can't afford it. One of the things that happened as a result of that is Bishop Brazier took me along. We met with the assessor at the time, and we couldn't get him to freeze taxes for low-income people, but we did set up a loan program where the city and the county pooled funds, and they would actually make a 1% loan to homeowners who were at 80% of median income, who had been in their house for 10 years, who had been owner occupants for 10 years or more, so that they could pay the difference between what their house would have been taxed at $50,000 value versus $200,000 value. And that opened up a door. When that happened, and it was an annual renewal, but when that happened, people were more willing to see development happen because they could get the appreciation, but they didn't have to have an immediate worry about taxation. Now, if they refinanced it, they did anything that was going to, accrue to them, they had to pay the taxes at the current rate. But it opened the door. So what I'm really trying to get at is that we try to be creative in terms of how we work with people to make sure that we could build new housing. Kenwood Point was one of the projects that I worked on in my time in Woodlawn. It was a 47 unit or home, single family and 2-flat home project. You see the descriptors for the single family homes here. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is we built 1,600 square foot single family home, unfinished basement, typical single family home on a lot. But we also had granny flats, what we call granny flats. It was a 2-unit building. First floor was a flat, and the single family house that we built on grade, we actually built on top of the flat. The curious thing is we were going to build 17 of the granny flats, and the balance of the 47 units were going to be single family homes. Lo and behold, we did affordability tests. Once we did affordability tests, we found out that it was, and the public found out, that it was actually cheaper to own a two-unit granny flat, notwithstanding the fact that the granny flat cost $50,000 more than the single. The reality was when you added rental income to a person's personal income, it was actually cheaper for them to own a granny flat than it was. So our 15 units wound up becoming 28, and the balance was single family. We actually flipped the script in terms of how people thought about that. But the other benefit of this unit that we discovered is that we had a lot of people who were interested in moving into the neighborhood, who were nurses at the University of Chicago Hospital, who were teachers in the community and wanted to live closer to the schools that they went to, but they had kids, they had mothers, they had mother-in-laws. And so they needed to have somebody take care of their kids. They needed somebody to take care of their family members. And having a unit where the family member could be close proximity, but not in the same house, was a real boon. That was the other benefit, in addition to the financial benefit, of having these units. So we discovered a way to, in our community, provide housing that really served not only an economic, but a need that people had in their families. This is just some screenshots of Kenwood. These houses went from 64th Street to 66th Street. They basically did not, there were some people who still had houses there. This was mostly vacant land. There was some existing housing. We built around the existing housing. We had the east side of the street, the west side of the street. So we did both sides of the street for 2 blocks. And it changed the dynamic of the neighborhood. And in each of these slides, and I don't have all the pictures, but in each of these slides, you'll find that subsequent to our development, other developers came in and built similar or even better housing around that. We didn't just build single family housing. On the left, Kenwood Point is, you can see if you look very closely to the left of the multifamily building is one of the Kenwood Point houses. But this is a multifamily housing tax credit project that we did simultaneous with the single family construction. So we wanted to provide home ownership, but we also wanted to continue to provide rental housing. The other building is a distance away, not a great distance away, but a bit away. It's called Drexel Terrace. At least it was at the time. When I went back to take this picture, I found out they had renamed it. But it was Drexel Terrace, and this was, I think, 54 units of tax credit rental housing for families. This is infill housing. Everybody's done infill housing around, but this is on 61st Street. Across the street from this housing is the University of Chicago. This was the first housing in Woodlawn that sold for plus $200,000. And it was built as a joint venture between WPIC and a guy by the name of Lanier Richardson. Lanier is a African-American developer, lawyer, who had helped us on some other projects and came to us and said, I have an idea. I want to have an all African-American project. I want to work with you guys to get it done. And can we do that? And we built these 5 houses. Again, 3-bedroom, full basement, all of the amenities that you can well imagine. It was a tough site. It was a tight site, but we got it done. And I don't know whether the same people are there, but many of the same people are there. This is Plaisance Place, another market rate single family housing. Some of these units did get subsidized, but in phase 1 on Greenwood, these were 3 lots. You'll notice that this is a gated community. I talked about earlier that the community was considered unsafe. One of the things that we did to sort of attract people to the community was we created a gated community. Gated communities have this sense of exclusivity. And so we created that as a way in the 90s to attract people to quality housing that they might not have otherwise been interested in, and to get them to move into the neighborhood. I mean, there was no, the financial inducement was that these houses in phase 1 cost $140,000. Each were 3-bedroom, 2-bath, 1-car garage under the building, and they were $140,000. Phase 2 was a little bit more successful. We sold those units at a base price of $160,000. Phase 3 isn't depicted, but phase 3 sold for $180,000. So in each case, we were creating the market for what we're seeing today. Bill Eager sent these pictures out, and I just couldn't help but put them in here. This is 63rd Street back in the day. I've got to believe that this is around the 50s, maybe the early 60s, from the bus and the cars. But this was Woodlawn when it was when 63rd Street was still a thriving downtown for the community. I'm not from Chicago, and I didn't live in Woodlawn at the time. This is 63rd Street. This is what 63rd Street would have looked like if I had taken the picture back in the 90s, but this is the other end of, this is West Woodlawn, and this is a picture of 63rd Street under the L. And I left this out here to give you a sense of what the street looked like before Columbia Point, which was sort of the signature project in Woodlawn at the time. Columbia Point was an effort to build 140 homes along 63rd Street from Kenwood to Drexel on both sides of the street. We'd work with the city to get TIF and to use it to clean up the site, to demolish whatever buildings were there, to relocate those 1 or 2 businesses that were left, and to basically close on the site. We built the first phase, 28 homes. I can tell you that, to the surprise of my life, we opened the sales center on a Thursday afternoon at about 4 o'clock. I got a call Sunday night of that weekend from our marketing agent saying that they had deposits and contracts for all of the 28 units that were in the first phase, and we hadn't put a shovel in the ground. These were people who had seen the plans, who were eager to live in this neighborhood, and had purchased these properties. These houses sold for between $200,000 and $350,000, depending on the size and the amenities and so forth. The picture that you see in the forefront is a 2-flat. It is bigger than the one that I showed you on Kenwood. It has, this is, I think, the biggest house that we actually did. The one on the left, this one here is a single family home there, and then you've got a 2-flat on the other side of that. These are some buildings. This was an existing building. At one point, we thought about tearing this down. This is now residential condo and with retail on the ground floor. It's got a coffee shop. Had been a coffee shop that I knew of in Woodlawn for many a year. And then the building to my right is University of Chicago Charter School. I just threw this in. This is a project that's under construction by an African-American developer contractor who's building this on Ellis. It is, I don't know what he's pricing these at, but he typically prices somewhere between $650,000 and $800,000. And these are single family houses. I took a shot from the back. I didn't put it out here, but these all have sort of roof decks that allow you to get visuals of downtown Chicago. Lastly, WPIC owned and developed this project called Grove Park. And Grove Park was a 504 unit, and Bill Eager and Felicia are going to talk about this. We built a 504 unit property. Those units were, we never had enough money, so we built them for the money we had. Unfortunately, they didn't do well. And so finally they were sold to POA. Bill and Felicia are going to talk to you about that. And I want to thank you for your time and attention. I would be grateful to answer any questions that you might have about how we did it mechanically. I warned them that I have a penchant for talking too much, so I was trying to be abbreviative, but I'm going to now turn it over to Bill Eager and to Felicia, and I want to just thank you for it. Bill?
You're good to go, Bill and Felicia. But we can't hear you at the moment, so we're not sure what's going on with your microphones. You are both unmuted at the moment. Oh, there's Felicia's camera.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. And Felicia, can you unmute
Okay.
again?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, you're both
Sorry
good.
about that, everybody. Okay, good. Good afternoon. My name is Bill Eager, and I'm with Preservation of Affordable Housing Incorporated, or POA, as we're usually referred to. We are a not-for-profit affordable housing developer that we've been working in Woodlawn for the last dozen years or so. Before we get going, I'd like to thank the EPA and the Maryland Planning Department and the Smart Growth Network for allowing us to present today on something that is near and dear to our hearts, and that is the work in Woodlawn. And I'd like to thank all the attendees who are interested in this topic. I'm going to go through a few slides, and I'm also going to be sharing my time with my sidekick, Felicia Dawson, who is a vice president for community and strategic partnerships. Felicia and I have worked side by side in Woodlawn, for the last 10 years. But we also bring, I think, some different perspectives. So I'm going to kind of share our slides and our presentation as best we can. So again, this is Woodlawn. As Dr. Brazier pointed out, I say a choice neighborhood because the work that we did in Woodlawn was facilitated by a HUD Choice Neighborhoods Initiative grant of $30.5 million, which we were awarded in 2011. And it really helped sort of accelerate the work and kind of expand the vision for the work. Why is my screen not advancing? Sorry.
Can you click on it?
Let me try it again. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry. So a little bit of background on us first. Again, we're POA. We own and manage about 12,000 units in 12 states. Our largest holdings are along the eastern seaboard, but we also have about 3,500 units in the Midwest, and nowadays about 2,400 units in and around the Chicago market. Our work in Chicago actually began in Woodlawn, and I'll get into that story in a little bit, about 12 years ago, and that's Felicia and myself. Again, building on what Dr. Brazier said, and this is important not only so that you have some context, some geographic context, but, Woodlawn, for all of its economic challenges over the years, really has great, wonderful amenities, has good bones, as people like to say. It is a lakefront community, of course. It is surrounded by two of the most beautiful urban parks you'll ever see. Jackson Park, which will be home to the Obama Center, and Washington Park to the northwest. They're both Frederick Law Olmsted designed for the park planners in the crowd. They're lovely, and they are connected by a park called the Midway, which sort of bisects the southern end of the University of Chicago campus. In addition to that, it has really great transportation access. There's an L line, which will be referred to in a presentation. There is also a metro, a commuter line, which is more of a suburban line, but it stops in Woodlawn. There's excellent vehicular access. Institutional access. The University of Chicago, while the relationship between the university and the community has ebbed and flowed over the years, the university and the university hospital are the largest employers on the south side of Chicago. So it is a very important institutional anchor as well. I'm going to back up briefly. In my introductory remarks, I thank the EPA and others. I also want to thank, Dr. Brazier and Bill Jones for their partnership over the years. We have worked with them both. We work quite closely with the network of Woodlawn. Felicia and I sit on the board of the network of Woodlawn. We work with One Woodlawn, and I think it's fair to say that we would not be where we are in terms of the work we've done without our relationship with the Apostolic Church of God, Dr. Brazier, the network of Woodlawn, all of that. So this is certainly not work that we have done in a vacuum. A little bit more on Woodlawn, the current population, the new census numbers that are out listed at 24,400. I saw some numbers last year that had it over 25,000, but they're about 25,000 units. What's interesting, I think, in terms of how it's changing, the population after decades of decline, and Dr. Brazier showed you how many people lived there in the middle of the last century. After decades of decline, the population has begun to grow again since 2010. The total numbers of the population itself has grown by a little. The numbers of households have grown substantially. So that's up almost 12% over the last 10 years. And so I think what that's showing is obviously more households, but smaller households. So it's reflecting a change in household size as well. It is still a predominantly African-American community, although the share of the neighborhood that's African-American is also declining. It was one of Chicago's many classic white flight neighborhoods in the middle of the last century. The population, as you can see, flipped substantially in a 10 to 20 year period. Primarily a renter neighborhood, but there is a growing home ownership segment, and it was hit very hard by the foreclosure crisis of 2008. So some of the progress that had been made in the decades, leading up to the last one was sort of stifled by the foreclosure crisis. And then I'm going to have Felicia jump in and talk a little bit about, kind of how our work started. It started with something called Grove Park Apartments. So Felicia, you want to jump in?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. I'm going to say all of the wonderful thank you to all the people that Bill just thanked. I just want to highlight that we could not have been successful in the work we've done had not it been for the leadership that the neighborhood had. Dr. Finney, rest in peace. Bishop Brazier, rest in peace. Bill Jones, Dr. Brazier now. I mean, the work that the community did really was helpful in the thing that we needed to get started. The residents of Grove Park Plaza, 504 project-based Section 8 units, kind of in the middle of Woodlawn. If you're thinking about Woodlawn as Dr. Brazier has done and put it in 4 quadrants, this property set right in the middle of this intersection of the 4 quadrants. So you had in this neighborhood, this 504 project-based Section 8 units. It was in its heyday when it first started in the late 1960s, first developed, it was a destination, and it actually won an architectural design award. So what Bill Jones does, his last slides, and what you see on this slide is an example of what the property looked like, and that's what it called for. But as time went on, HUD decided that it just couldn't invest anymore, was going to really figure out how they gave everybody a voucher and move everyone out. But the residents decided that they wanted to stay. In the meantime, and while things were, as the residents were trying to figure that out, Dr. Brazier had worked with the community and the team to put together a quality of life plan, and I actually started Bishop Brazier too. And the quality of life plan had in it for the neighborhood the redevelopment and revitalization of Grove Park. So it was just having a neighborhood plan put together by the community at large. And then you had these residents who were saying they wanted to stay, and they really fought like hell to stay. They pushed back on HUD, they did protests, they did a sit-in at the regional office at HUD, and HUD acquiesced and said, okay, you've got to find a developer, you've got to have a plan that makes sense. And those units, the 504, that affordability needs to stay in the neighborhood. So the residents did that. We all partnered together. HUD, the residents reached out to us, and this is very important because POA was very much a development company that did acquisition rehab deals. We acquire property, we rehab them in place, we bring people back. That was our niche. That is what we did well. But as the residents reached out to us, we were crazy enough to take on this new neighborhood revitalization opportunity that was new for us. That's not something that we had typically done prior. So, and we had a good reputation in HUD for trying to do the right thing by people living in the property and rehab deals. So we all came together, came up with a preliminary plan, making sure we tried to keep those units in place. Got that property in 2008 and started that redevelopment process in 2010. We had to preserve the 504, but what we did was try to think about how we just couldn't do it all in one footprint. We had to figure out how to spread that across. And we did this work in conjunction with the resident leadership. I'm going to say that it's typically called a tenant association, but the resident association was strong, very vocal, had galvanized itself and really kind of strengthened its teeth, along with students from the university who gotten together, put an organization together, along with Maddie Butler. You've heard her name a couple of times. Maddie Butler was extremely instrumental in us being a really interested party in this effort, because remember, we're in a South Side neighborhood in Chicago, and POA was a Boston-based development company. Now, all of us that work here are from Chicago, but POA's presence had not been known, and we were very much embedded in Boston. So coming from Boston to Chicago was a thing in and of itself. So we needed local champions, and again, we needed that neighborhood that was strong, that had a strong voice and knew what they wanted. They said, this is what and who we want to come work with us. So we started out, we demolished 26 buildings that were there all along the footprint. I think I want to note here that we began, the conversation was a build first. So we thought about taking buildings down and then keeping some up, moving families around on site. But the residents in the property, in the surrounding community, pushed for us to do a final, just take everything out. So that was their focus. Bill, was that my cue to keep moving?
No, sorry. You let me know when you're ready to go to the next slide.
Okay. So again, so thinking mixed use, thinking mixed income, really being intentional about the language, the process. How do we do relocation? Staying connected to to the families while they're temporarily housed. That's really big, particularly if you're doing public housing developments. And while we're not doing this is project-based Section 8 development, it is really important to have that language, because you want to keep ties to families so that they know and feel like they're coming back, and there's really no displacement. We also, again, acquisition rehab deals was our claim to fame, so we're very good at doing rehab, and this was our new construction effort. So a goal, reduce the density of the low-income apartments, but kind of mix it up, making sure people were connected. And I will tell you, the resident association not only helped us identify places where we could do acquisition rehab, they also identified places for us to temporarily house families. They went and inspected those places with us. We worked and walked with them through this process every step of the way. Every resident was worked in it. So we had them locked in early, residents, other stakeholders. It took us some time to build some trust, to mean what we say and say what we mean, and people believe it. And while the residents from Grove Park asked us to come in, we still had to prove ourselves to some extent. And I know we put the word input here, but sometimes we use these words interchangeable, and I really want people to know that we developed a plan and have been consistent in this plan based upon what people said they wanted. Quality of life plan determined that we needed to do the redevelopment, and we walked hand in hand with the residents, down to walking with them through what type of design, what type of brick, what type of materials we use, which way did we want the sun to come in, so that we really got in depth with residents in these buildings and walked them through the process. The choice grant helped us figure that out, but the choice grant was also very much of a challenge to navigate. We had to keep our public commitments: no displacement, full replacement. 1-for-1, 504 units had to stay in the neighborhood. And interestingly enough, I don't know why Bill put that on the slide, I'll tell him about that later, but interestingly enough,
Didn't mean to.
no worries, interestingly enough, this was, again, POA's first entree into this neighborhood revitalization, thinking more about just the brick and mortar and the rehab of one building, but really thinking about how and what our role is as a stakeholder in the neighborhood. And they needed someone to figure that out. So they were just crazy enough to hire me and add me to the team to help think through what that could look like. Okay, next slide, Bill. Typically, people know when I do presentations, I usually keep it fun. So here we are. We've been thinking about this master plan. We've been working with community. We've been trying to pace out what it's going to look like, what we're going to build. Our stakeholders, I would tell you, Dr. Brazier kept us on our toes. A lot of the work that he talked about, choice allowed us to do that. But I will tell you, what happens a lot of times is there's always a focus on the people that live in the subsidized units around organizing and engaging. And sometimes we miss the mark on engaging the surrounding community. And what happened was the residents that lived around this Grove Park apartment complex, that had posed some challenges over the years in the neighborhood. People would drive around it, really rush through the lights. And it's in a major intersection in this neighborhood that gets you to the central business district, to the far south side. It's kind of that kind of thoroughfare. So so it had this stigma, and some of it real and perception, reality. Crime was an issue. There was a lot of things happening. But the residents, when the surrounding community, homeowners and renters surrounding this property, really hadn't been kept in the loop enough. Not like they wanted to be. And when they heard that, number one, we got this $30.5 million from Choice, and that we were going to tear down Grove Park and everybody was going to move, they automatically went into chaos. So the slide you see is which I started out in this work as a community organizer for Donald Maxwell in Kansas City, Missouri. But I loved this, but it was painful. Everybody that was on the east side and west side of Cottage Grove galvanized against us. They went literally to a Kinko's, typed this up, and made copies of them and laminated them and gave them out to people all around the neighborhood in protest of the work that we were doing. So while we were planning with the residents that lived in Grove Park and thinking through and talking to stakeholders, we still had this strong, organized voice This is what I tell you about really listening to community and not talking at community or thinking you're going to guess what they need and give it to them and think it's okay. The community said, nope, we don't want it. And they pretty much tried to stop every effort of this process. So what we did was took that choice budget. We had a series of meetings. Some of the meetings was what we call setup meetings because they were well organized by Dr. Finney. So we took that choice budget, and the formula I have for this work is what I call TIC. We were very transparent about what we were trying to do, what the development plan was, and we were very transparent about the money. Because when you hear $30.5 million, people automatically assumed I was walking around, or Bill was walking around with $30.5 million in our pocket, and we were not. So what we did was took that budget and broke it down and then said, here's where the buckets lie, here's what we can do, here's what we can't, and here's where we want you to roll up your sleeves and work with us. That was our transparency. And then we included them in the process, planning for what we want to have. At this time, as Dr. Brazier talked about, which is great timing, the network of Woodlawn was also re-engaging and organizing the community to continue to be voices, getting them trained in understanding development. That's crucial. So we did that, and we were consistent. My line is, you may not like what we say, but we're always going to tell you the truth. The final thing is always being responsive. And as we build and as we rehab, we're property managers. And for us, what helps is that we're owner manager that is going to be in the neighborhood for the next 15, 20 years. So we're going to be right there with everybody, and we have to be embedded stakeholders. So that meant we had to be and do something that we're typically not. And that made POA stretch its bones. So I'm going to stop there because I'm going to come back to a little bit more of that a little bit later and give it back to my partner in crime, Bill.
Thanks, Felicia. So a couple things. So in terms of the actual development work itself, so all the stuff we've talked about actually led to 10 years worth of development. I divided into sort of two parts. There is what we call the footprint, and that was the area that included the original Grove Park Plaza apartments, which I'll come back to in a second. And then more broadly in the neighborhood, because our work was a mix of kind of redeveloping that footprint into a more mixed income, mixed use community, and acquisition rehab in the surrounding community, which allowed us to sort of A, maximize investment, but also B, sort of allow for the reduced density of Section 8 housing, if you will. So the map you see in front of you is the master plan that we came up with for the quote footprint. So everything, excluding the gold box at the bottom, everything above that includes what was Grove Park Plaza. So it was 26 buildings, lining both sides of Cottage Grove Avenue, running from the top to the bottom. That's a north-south street in Woodlawn. And then toward the bottom, just above that, between the gold and purple boxes, that is the 63rd Street that was referred to, the major intersection in Woodlawn. So this property was really right in the heart of that. So all of those buildings have been demolished and rebuilt with a mix of mostly housing, but in the two purple boxes, we also done mixed use. So they have apartments above commercial spaces, which, knock on wood, have gone pretty well. They're full, we're fully leased, and that's important. And we were able to lease largely to locally owned, African-American owned businesses. Two partnerships that we struck along the way, though, that I think are important are sort of the green and the red box toward the top. Those are properties that we as POA as developer did not actually develop, but we partnered with others to come in and kind of do their thing. So the first was the little green box, is where we essentially donated land to an entity called Metro Squash, which is a really wonderful 501c3 organization that works with low-income kids, primarily from the South Side, beginning in 5th grade. And they provide them with a mix of education and mentoring and athletics. And in this case, it's squash, which is not something you think of as sort of an inner city sport, but it works really, really well for them. And so they raised all their own money, and they built roughly a 20,000 square foot center, which has squash courts and an education center. I'm going to try and wrap up here in a second. And then just to the north of that, we partnered with another group to develop the first full service grocery store in the neighborhood in decades, which has been a really wonderful success story and source of employment. This next map, what I just showed you is sort of in the middle of this screen, but the other boxes are other properties that we have acquired and rehabbed in our time here. So this is largely what we promised to the community and to our partners. You know, the redevelopment of Grove Park Plaza, new shopping and employment, about 1,000 new mixed income housing units, market and affordable, and to help, you know, engender greater community involvement and organization. This is what we've done thus far. I think we've actually now rehabbed 26 buildings, but you get the idea. And now there are other projects emerging around. There's a big transit node at 63rd and Cottage Grove. These are just examples of a couple of the properties that we developed. Here's another one that we like very much. It was a primarily market rate building that's really done very, very well. Felicia, you want to jump in and tell people what Renew Woodlawn was? And I do think we're kind of running low on time, so.
Sure. Renew Woodlawn was a program where we worked with residents to come up with how we acquired some of through a partnership with CIC, Community Investment Corporation, and Neighborhood Housing Services. We did a two-pronged approach where we did model blocks and we targeted blocks to take in those abandoned buildings, rehab them, and then sell them to people that lived in the neighborhood using the neighborhood network. We had a goal of 20 and we did 44. And we're getting ready to do round 2 in 2022. That was amazing, and that was driven by the residents. This is what they said they wanted as a result of choice. You can keep going, Bill. I'm going fast.
Yep.
So we know that there were some positive things happen out of this. I will just mention that's not on here, but while there were some challenges over the years, the thing that has been prevalent and the thing that we build on is everybody loves Woodlawn. If you live there, been there, the historical cultural connection is rich. The property values have starting to go up. That homeownership program and others, we're starting to see an uptick in population, increase in incomes. OPC coming, that's important. So there's a lot of things happening. So as we move forward, the green line, transportation, this conversation around transit-oriented development, how do we maximize the opportunities that we have? Those 4 corners that we talked about that's in the middle of Woodlawn is a huge development opportunity, and we're trying to work with partners to do that. It's kind of been underutilized and underinvested in, but we're trying to figure that out, partnering with the University of Chicago, CTA. How do we use vacant land a little bit better and think a little bit differently and strategically, and then have these different parcels work together. We know that now is the time, as we continue to be a part of the network of Woodlawn and all of the things that are happening, now is a time to even further renew the voices because pressures are coming. With the OPC coming, we've seen prices change, people feeling that push a little bit. How do we get people engaged so that they can really be a part of what happens? And I will tell you that the movement of the community created an ordinance through the city that was a partnership, and that means everybody take off their gloves and sit down at the table and work together, all the stakeholders, and try to figure it out. I would say what we know works really quickly. You've got to either you don't know it, but you've got to partner with somebody that knows the neighborhood, looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities. And then the first thing you do is pick out what is the brightest part of the neighborhood and begin to sell it, because you want to change the narrative and create a new optic around it. We have to become something different. So you have to be a part of the neighborhood. We could not be just one of those people that own that property. We have to be embedded. They need to know us. We need to talk to us on a regular basis and get to you, and then say what you mean and mean what you say. Creating that new narrative is critical. And that narrative has to be done with the residents and not for them, but with them, and they drive what that is. And if that means you have to stop and build capacity, whatever that is, or knowledge base, I won't even say capacity because communities already have capacity. Interestingly enough, Bill has put my personal cell phone, so but there is a way to call us, and you can
Hey, I
email
put mine
us
up
too.
there.
You can email us, and we would love to share the story. We live on the shoulders of all the people that have come before us on this call and those that are in the neighborhood prior to us. So we thank you very much, and we got that all in quickly.
Thank you all very much. I hope we didn't run over too much of our time.
Great, thank you all. So we're going to turn it over to Jim and the panel and have everybody turn their cameras on. And before we go into the audience questions, we'll have Jim ask a couple questions of the panel. We can get that out there. And thanks to everybody who has submitted questions already. We'll get to those in a little bit. You can continue to send them in by the questions tab. And we may be going over a little bit to get to them as we go into the discussion. So I'll turn it over to Jim.
I just before we go into the audience questions, I just want to pose one question to the group. What is it that makes people want to stay in Woodlawn? You're all working to make changes and improvements to neighborhood conditions. Can you tell us how this ties together in order to make the neighborhood attractive for people to stay in and to move into? Maybe Dr. Brazier?
I would say that you have to take a look at you have to take every community you have to look at as a package. And it goes back to the 4 pillars. And people want to know, what is education and what is safety like? If in fact you understand education and safety, then you can development and developers will follow. And that is one of the things that we have done. And the reason people have chosen it, Woodlawn, is because of its natural assets. It is by the lake. It has a 300-acre park. It's got the University of Chicago. It has transportation, all the things that Bill said. That is the attraction. That was the attraction for the Obama Library to go into Jackson Park. And so it is attractive from its position. And we also try to make it attractive from the standpoint of its housing, its schools, and we're looking, to make sure that it is as safe a community as possible.
I would only add one thing very quickly. And I sense, and I may be mistaken, but I sense that there is sort of a current of optimism in the community. I think people feel like things are, beginning to turn in a more positive direction. And so I think people are excited to be a part of that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would think that the other thing is that people, they're long-term stakeholders, have been here, whether you owned your home for a long time or you moved out and you rented. The sense of neighborhood, people know where the corner grocery store used to be. They know, they raise their families there. So that kind of pride in space and historical connection is really the thing that drives people to stay, the ones that have.
Yeah, I would just add, I think all that's correct. And I think I would just add that I went through the hard times. It looks like good times are coming. I want to be there for the good times too.
That should be a song lyric if it's not. We'll pass this along to Michael Bayer, who will relay questions from the audience.
Great, thanks, Jim. And thanks to everybody who has submitted them. We've gotten several here. So we'll get through as many as we can in the next 15 or so minutes here. The first one here is from Pauline Louie, who is asking, did Woodlawn ever receive a federal promise zone designation? I see the choice neighborhood and promise neighborhood, but not sure about the promise zone.
The answer to that question is we did not. We applied twice, and but in one of those, we actually was submitted 1 minute after the deadline. And it was very, very upsetting to the leadership. I think we actually went for the Promise Zone grant prior to choice, if I'm not mistaken. And Bill may be able to. I think
that's right.
Prior to the choice. And then when the choice grant came, then we stopped doing the promise because you couldn't do both in the same neighborhood.
Okay. Next question here is, were community benefits agreements used with developers? And if so, do you believe they were successful at directing development according to the community will?
Felicia, you want to handle this one, or you want me to?
So I will say that, but we didn't necessarily do a community benefits agreement per se. We did do a kind of a spirit of a memorandum of understanding together with the tenant association, the resident association. But what I would tell you is, because the community was so involved, at least in the work that we were doing, and we were delivering on, and they were walking through the process with us, there was the benefit was that we were working together to do it. So to a certain extent, we didn't necessarily have to have a CBA because we were just doing it together, and residents owned it and they felt like they were doing this work. Even if we didn't agree all the time, we come out with, here's what we're going to do next. So I don't know, Bill, would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, it was sort of a CBA with the Grove Park Tenants Association. But once the Presidential Center was announced that it was, coming to the neighborhood, there was a much sort of broader push for a broad community benefits agreement. And that was a fight that went on for a few years. I think it's largely been settled because everybody came to the table, most groups came to the table. And really the city sort of brokered what's called the Woodlawn Preservation Ordinance, which is really a series of strategies aimed at helping people stay in the community in the face of anticipated gentrification. So I think that is what became of the CBA argument.
I think one of the other
you guys
things.
think that's about right? Go ahead,
Yeah,
Dr. Brady. You know this a little better than I do.
Yeah, one of the things you have to keep in mind is that we were a community-developed community as opposed to a developer-developed community. And so a lot of all the developments that Bill spoke to were actually driven out of the community organizations, and the community will was already a part. And we already had community engagement that was a part of what we were doing. So we really didn't have to tussle too much with community agreements at that point. And then going back to what Bill said is that there was some effort to have a community benefits agreement with the Obama Library. There was an effort, but the community pretty much said, we already want this, and it didn't really take hold in Woodlawn.
Yeah, and Dr. Brazier just pretty much said it, but I'll say it slightly differently. When you have Bishop Brazier and Leon Finney as the people directing traffic, there was no way that you weren't going to have community participation. It just wasn't. I worked there for the years that I did, and the only instruction I ever got was you've got to make sure that you have maximum community participation in construction. I mean, I think every project we did that I showed you, and almost every project that we did, had a minority architect, had 30, 40, 50% minority participation in construction and so forth. Minority property managers. So it was never an issue for us.
Great, thank you. We have another question here from Beth Grigsby, who's asking how the original planning documents were paid for.
The original planning documents, the quality of life was paid for out of the LISC New Communities program grant, which was funded by MacArthur. The three studies that we had done through the network of Woodlawn were funded through separate different grants that were really provided through the Citibank, and they really tied themselves to a community, and we're thankful for them. So that's how they were funded. And we were funded, I think those three studies were somewhere in the area of around $300,000 to $400,000 for the three of them.
And the master planning stuff for our work, I mean, we largely paid for that through POA. We did get some small grants along the way to help defray those costs. So we carried a lot of those, for our own sort of master planning, and then we recouped it incrementally over time.
Okay, thank you. I guess this question is directed to you, Dr. Brasher. It's asking here, what data, such as interviews, historic documents, census data, and so on, were used to inform the anti-displacement strategies?
That really came out of the AECOM study that we looked at to begin to really address that. We also had some strategies around the city-owned land and the land that was owned by what is known as the land bank, the Cook County Land Bank. We understood that there was about 250 acres of vacant land in Woodlawn when we first started our studies. Half of that was owned by the city, the other half was privately held. And our strategy was to support the building with the city, what that land looks like, and the studies that we have done have been accepted by the city as part of what is known as the Plan Commission review, and we're now I think the documents are available. We won't happen to make them available to AECOM. That really deals with the demographics, how we took a look at the mitigation strategies. We had a banker through one of the major banks in Chicago that was part of our study, and what that looked like. How did we try to balance all those things came out of that study.
Okay, thank you. I know we were just talking about this a little bit, but someone wants us to dig in a little bit deeper, asking what strategies did you use to engage residents outside of regular public meetings to establish community will and foster a sense of community ownership?
I will say that in the One Woodlawn designation, in each one of those quadrants, we had 4 different quadrants divided by 63rd Street and Cottage Grove. And we had quadrant leaders, and we had 6 or 7 people within each quadrant that was a part of the planning process. We also engaged the schools in each one of those, and the parents in each one of those areas are part of the strategy, along with the stakeholders that were in those quadrants as well, which says that on a regular basis, on a weekly, monthly basis, we had pretty close to 100 people all at the same time working in either education, safety, or economic development. And then we would have our One Woodlawn public meeting every 90 days. So we engaged them on a regular basis. We also had community organizers that were a part of in each one of the quadrants. And so we had a very active, ongoing engagement process.
Okay. Actually, here's another more personal question for you, Dr. Brasher. What was the thing that sparked you to get involved? And this question is from Janet Pope. What advice would you give other people who work with communities on getting faith-based leaders involved in their work?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. To answer the question about me, it is, you could say it kind of was past. The involvement my father had in Woodlawn, in the city of Chicago, was tremendous. He was one of the men who invited. There were 3 of them who invited Dr. King to actually come to Chicago. My father was one of them. I had an opportunity to meet Dr. King, and it was just, you could say it was passed down. It was a part of the history of the church. And if you become the pastor of the Apostolic Church of God, you must have a love for people and for the organizing. When it comes down to how do you encourage other faith-based leaders, it is, you don't want to get into this idea of necessarily faith-based leaders. One of the things that you should consider is who is the convener in the community. There are leaders and then there are conveners. Every leader is not a convener, but every convener is a leader. And when my father had 100 members, he was still the convener. of the community. So you're not looking necessarily for a large community footprint like the Apostolic Church of God. You're looking for that person that people trust, that's able to bring people together, who is an honest broker within the community. And I will tell you that there is several in every community that you go to. They may not be the one who has the loudest voice, and which you would tend to say, well, who has the loudest voice? And you say, well, that must be the leader. The convener may not have the loudest voice, but they have the greatest influence, and you're going to have to look for them and find them.
Good answer.
That's right.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, just a couple more questions here, knowing that we're already after 3:30 Eastern. Here's one from Jeff Mann, who's asking, did the multitude of different planning and development organizations ever get in the way of the community redevelopment effort?
Never, not for a moment.
Would you like to elaborate on?
Sure, I was joking. A little bit, yeah. I mean, there are a number of plans. I mean, I think in more recent years, I think the city and some others have tried to sort of distill them down to their elements. I think the network of Woodlawn and One Woodlawn has been a really important instrument in sort of helping sort of, distill everything. It's been a really important umbrella organization for the community to express what it wants. So yes, it's been a little bit confusing, but I also think that the city and the community and others have done a pretty good job in recent years of trying to coordinate all of that.
The major elements around the different plans is really how you reconcile. It's important. Every plan has its own ingredient, and how those plans are reconciled and how they're brought together becomes very critical. And when you say, and every plan, there's some plans that look at a corner. There's some plans that look at a block. There are other plans that look at the whole community at large, which is what we did. And you have to be able to sort through it. But they have never been obstructions to making a decision. They've always been those who, people put up money to have a plan, then their plan should be considered.
I don't want to I'm just going to add to what Dr. Brazier just said, because the one thing that's consistent with all the planning efforts is that the people from the neighborhood have to come to them. And I think having the network of Woodlawn, being able to kind of help navigate, oh, this is a plan, but that includes some of the plans overlap. Some of the plans include the same, some of the same data. So making sure people understand, what Dr. Brazier just said, why this plan is for what. And then, bringing that together, because they're the ones that's going to go to all of these planning processes and sessions in and of themselves. So you've got to have somebody kind of helping with the language on it.
Great, thank you. We'll ask two more here, and then I'll turn it over to Jim for some final thoughts and talking about the next one in the series. Next question here is from Jonathan Sussman, who says, how have Black ownership rates been impacted by the development? Has the Renew Woodlawn vacant building redevelopment initiatives brought a significant increase in this rate?
Could you repeat the question?
It was a question about how the projects have impacted Black home ownership rates in the community, and how the Renew Woodlawn vacant building redevelopment initiatives have affected it.
Well, I can
I don't ahead, Felicia.
I'll just quickly say that, at least in the small bucket of Renew Woodlawn, all of those families, except for maybe 5, were Black people who were purchasing properties. And then a number of them were people who lived in the neighborhood whose children came back to buy in the neighborhood. So I'll just add that. And then Bill, I'll kick it over to you.
No, that was about all I was. I don't actually have any data on, home ownership rates and any changes in them, by race or ethnicity, unfortunately. So we do think it helped kind of restart the home ownership market, particularly in West Woodlawn, which was the most economically challenged. We think it helped change attitudes about buying homes in that part of the city, that part of the neighborhood. And there are now, in the wake of that work, developers building new in West Woodlawn, which was probably unheard of 5, 6, 7 years ago. So, I would like to look at that data maybe 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. I would imagine you would see a significant uptick, but no, I don't have any hard data at this point.
Nor do I. I think that the buyers that were buying the properties that we were building back in the late 90s, early 2000 were mostly African American. There was some transition from particularly on the north end of the community, but even that was a positive, because the fact that some majority families were moving into Woodlawn, some parts of Woodlawn, was encouraging to others that they could move in, that the neighborhood was in transition. So there's a plus and a minus, but I think overall, at least for the things that we did, the majority of the buyers were African American.
Okay. All right. So last question here is from Dr. Jim Walton, who says, leading change is always challenging. What was the most challenging obstacles that you have overcome in this work?
Who wants to start? We've all had different challenges.
Since the challenge that I faced was 10 years or so ago, 20 years ago, it was really convincing people at the time that it would work. There was probably more skepticism than optimism. Well, let me change the word optimism, but there was probably more skepticism about whether people would still be in the neighborhood if it improved than there probably is today.
Yeah, broadly, I think that one of the biggest challenges is, getting people to believe and buy into a new narrative. I think sometimes neighborhoods get stuck in certain narratives, and it's hard to break that. So I think sort of broadly, that was a significant challenge. Dr. Brazier, you have a lot more history here than I do, though.
Well, anytime you want to do something that is transformative, you do have obstacles. Some are political. There is a political will, and then there's a community will. And so one of the things that we really tried to do, which I had in my presentation, was to create a community will. And the community will supersedes a political will. It supersedes political preferences. And so as we built this, we went around and we committed. And I remember the first time that I presented a plan to the community. The first thing I asked them to do is that I need for you to trust me. I need for you to trust me for 3 years. Just give me 3 years, and we will have a plan in place, and we'll keep you informed. And I told them I would work diligently every month in order to ensure that I was going to be the one that they could trust. So gaining the trust of a community is probably the most critical issue. And in doing so, you have to put the person who's going to be convener, you got to put yourself out there, and you have to earn their respect. And they're not going to like you. Then you're not going to be necessarily the most liked individual, but you may be one of the most respected individuals.
That's right.
And the whole idea is to become the honest broker. That's probably the most difficult thing that I had to go through.
If I could add the another perspective that's just a little different, because my role was trying to be that, but for internally our organization, our company. So POA had to really trust that myself, Bill, that what we were saying was the right way to do it. And it was something that typically we don't do as developers. If you're a pure developer, you're doing your pro forma, you're not telling the world what it is. It's not that you're not being transparent, but you do the work of development. We had to open up our shop, the development shop, and allow it to be open so that residents could give and be a part of driving what we did. And that was very difficult. And that included being transparent with the budget, you know, what we're going to acquire. These are real things. We have to pay a little bit more into pre-development costs because we took the time to create renderings so that people could determine this is what they want or not. So that might not seem like a lot, but that was big. That's a huge thing. And that meaning we had to step outside our role, and somebody had to push us to step outside our role. And I think Bill and I tried to do that. And that was kind of very challenging internally, along with all the stuff that Dr. Brazier said about working with community, because our goal was we were committed to not this being just another deal that we do, but we really do it with residents and the community as a whole.
Great, thank you all. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jim to kind of talk a bit about what we've heard today and preview a bit about what's coming next.
I just want to close by saying that it's very uplifting to sit in a virtual room with the four of you who have devoted your lives and your careers and your skills to serving other people. And these were wonderful presentations, and thank you very much. Now,
Thank you all for having us.
Our next session will be held on the 29th of this month, and it will be focused on a neighborhood in Indianapolis. And the focus will be on the role of city bringing in a range of organizations to help, and on the role of community development corporations in bringing very significant change to a neighborhood. And so look forward to that 3 weeks from now. And again, thank you to our speakers. Wonderful job. With that, it's back to Michael.
Great, thanks, Jim. And we're finalizing that information. We'll be sending it out via the email list that we have here in the next few days to week. So with that, we're going to conclude our webinar today, the role of community and faith-based organizations in leading change. I'd like to offer a great big thank you to our panelists for a great presentation, to everyone who attended today, and to John Coleman, our communications and technology guru, who helps to make this all happen. The complete recording of today's webinar will be posted on smartgrowth.org. Also, for those of you who have requested one, all attendees will receive an email that will contain a link to a personalized certificate of participation. Please look for this follow-up email, especially if you're looking for this information, because that's the only way you can get it. When you exit from today's webinar, you'll be asked to participate in a short evaluation. Please take a few moments to provide feedback so that we can continue to improve the webinar experience for you. Finally, keep an eye on smartgrowth.org and your email inbox for details on other future webinars, including one tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, Parks as Community Infrastructure During and Beyond the Pandemic, Building Trust to Advance Equity. That's also going to be in coordination with our colleagues at EPA. So with that, I bid you all a good day.